Today, millions of machines are given more access than they need.
They gave me domain admin. I just wanted to run backups.
I can access everything. Should I? Probably not.
They told me to automate, so I automated everything. Nobody stopped me.
But with Delinea, you can take back control, giving every machine only the access it truly needs.
Now we machines don't just get recognized, we get intelligently authorized.
Machines are identities too. Authorize them intelligently.
Okay, that was a great intro. I love that. Hi, folks. Welcome to Identity Insiders. It's a LinkedIn Live series. My name is Phil Calvin. I'm the Chief Product Officer here at Delinea. Each one of these, we're going to sit down with some incredible experts. I'm going to introduce Chris in just a second. Explore where we are with identities, human identities, machine identities, and of course AI. How these can be protected, how they can be exploited. You got insider information, some practical lessons, and ways to help your organization secure the entire identity lifecycle. So it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and Delinea is calling on organizations to recognize and protect not just human identities, but machine and agent identities. Today I'm joined by Chris Hughes, host of the Resilient Cyber Show. Really happy to have Chris here, and maybe Chris just say a quick hello.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and dive into this timely topic. I know it's one that's getting a lot of attention in the community.
It definitely is. It's the rise of the machines, which I think was a Arnold Schwarzenegger movie back in the Terminator days. But how would you, when you think about, how would you define a machine identity for someone who's really new or trying to get their arms wrapped around the concept?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, as you know, in the industry, we always kind of create new concepts. But, in some extent, this has been around for a long time. Think about systems or service accounts, IAM roles, things of that nature, things that are used to facilitate, authentication, authorization type activities in the enterprise, API keys, tokens, certificates, secrets, things of that nature. But it's just kind of grown, as I'm sure we'll dive into, the kind of sprawl and problem, and scope of it has grown, and complexity of it has grown as our environments have evolved. But these are not necessarily new things entirely. We've had them around for quite some time, but they've just grown in terms of complexity and sprawl and scope and how we need to secure them. And I think they've come to the attention of attackers, much to our dismay as well now.
Oh, they definitely have. And, I like how you framed it. I think this concept has been around forever, this sort of concept of an identity, and an identity has some permissions, and now it's getting applied all over the place. I often think, like, if you rewind the Wayback Machine, identities were, whatever was in the physical confines of the office, and you had to actually walk into the office and to log in and do things. And with the rise of obviously new cloud providers and CSPs, and there's identity sprawl all over the place, and machines are making that even more complicated. But how do you see AI playing into that kind of role there, Chris?
Yeah, if you would have asked me, say 12 months ago, I would have given you a different answer. But now, with particularly the rise of agentic AI, on top of the early rush around LLMs and the earlier wave of AI excitement that we had, I would have had a different answer. But now, with the introduction of agents, I kind of think of it as giving LLMs arms and legs and autonomy to go do things in the enterprise, access internal systems, external systems, data stores, sensitive data, perhaps. Facilitate autonomous workflows. We see a lot of excitement around, trying to streamline and automate even human activities that we do in the enterprise using agents, for example. And all those agents are going to have associated with them credentials and HIs to facilitate those activities, authenticate, authorize them to do things, have entitlements and permissions associated with them. So I think it's really going to take, NHIs is already a bit of a challenge as, we look at this space, estimates vary, but they say 40 or 50 times to every single human identity, for example. Now you throw in agents to the mix, it's going to really exacerbate the problem much worse, especially as we kind of get our hands around fundamental things like governance and visibility and things of that nature when it comes to agentic AI too.
Oh, totally agree. And when you look at agents, there's a couple of problems that pop to mind from the identity viewpoint. The first one is if I, Phil, have an account and I'm a human and I can do certain things, that's great. But if I install an agent and I'm allowed to use that agent as Phil because I use my own account, then all of a sudden I've replicated myself in a kind of conceptual way, which is all of a sudden that I can do a lot more things than I could at a bigger pace. So they sort of behave at machine speed, but operate and feel like humans, and that really creates a challenge for organizations. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And not to plug something here, but I'm actually involved with a group at OWASP. And first off, OWASP has an excellent NHI top 10. Folks could check that out. Some top 10 risks associated with NHIs. And we're also in the process of putting out a first version or V1 of an agentic AI top 10, which will of course include some of the activities you're talking about, being able to potentially compromise an agent or abuse the privileges associated with an agent, use it to move laterally through the enterprise, et cetera. So I think it's really going to present some new challenges, that we haven't had to deal with in the past because we haven't had this autonomous, army of entities running around, autonomously conducting activities in the enterprise. So it's going to create a new attack surface and a new, surface in terms from a defensive perspective as well.
Yeah, I completely aligned with that. And you touched on the sort of 40, 50 times number of machine identities. When you sort of combine that sort of exponential growth of machine identities and then the explosion of and proliferation of identity providers, whether it's traditional infrastructure or cloud infrastructures, what do you see as the biggest challenge for customers to get their arms wrapped around?
Yeah, it's funny because you would expect, some kind of advanced, technique or obscure answer that's real flashy, right? But it's really the fundamentals, in my opinion: visibility, governance. We talk about things like how long, for years now, we've had, phrases like zero trust and least permissive access control. And we're still doing very poorly with those things when it comes to human identities, let alone NHIs and soon to be agents, for example. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for the enterprise. And just touching on the first one I brought up, visibility, I'd be curious from your perspective, why is visibility so hard when it comes to NHIs? Because it's something I see teams struggle with quite a bit, especially with legacy tool stacks and techniques and so on.
I think the proliferation that we've been talking about contributes to the problem. So if I've got again, if I rewind to 25 years ago, I've got a single Active Directory that I'm using, and I just need to look in that and I can see it. Nowadays, I've got large-scale Active Directory farms, but then I've got CSPs that have their own set of identities, and I've got SaaS apps that have their own set of identities, and that sprawl creates an incredible challenge for customers to get sort of one view of what's my risk exposure and how do I know where I should start. It's something that we're trying to invest incredibly heavily in what we call discovery. It's discovery visibility, kind of the same thing. We call it discovery in our world, and try and give in the Delinea platform customers the way that they can sort of look and see what is their identity risk across all of their providers, whether it's cloud or traditional on-prem, to give them a visibility and so they understand where do I need to tackle tomorrow and what do I need to do, as opposed to just I'm lost.
Yeah, what do you think, on the note of being lost and the lack of visibility, what is the compounding risk of, having these NHIs out there and, having poor visibility, not understanding their entitlements, their permissions, what they have access to, the type of activities they're conducting, what is the implication for the enterprise when it comes to that?
Well, I mean, you and I both built systems. When humans are given not enough privilege, they'll tend to squawk to their boss or to somebody, and they'll tend to ask for the right size permissions. But machines, when you're sort of wiring them up, you tend to overprivilege them, and so a machine-to-machine or an agent tends to get more permission than it needs, just to make it work, and that kind of stuff. And then you don't go back and right size it. You don't go back and take away the permissions. So the result of this is you have this incredible exposure of overprivileged systems. You mentioned a little earlier zero trust, and there's incredible amount of buzzwords. But if you can get your arms wrapped around the amount of overprivilege and unnecessary privilege you have in your system, which primarily comes out of the non-human identities and machine-to-machine communications that you're setting up, if you get your arms around that, you really have an opportunity to lower the standing privilege in your systems.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up some of the things you did, because I brought up the NHI top 10 and I don't remember all 10, I apologize, but a couple of that I do remember is overprivileged NHIs, right? And then secret leakage. You talked about the compounding, aggregation of entitlements and permissions for NHIs. And then we've seen, I can't even count the incidents of, secrets being embedded in source code management systems or, CI/CD, or getting exposed and being able to be used by external actors maliciously. And I think that's, that compounding risk, materialized, as you just kind of talked about, seeing it in action and it's have a cascading impact, not only for the organization itself, but maybe downstream customers, consumers, business partners, things like that as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. definitely. And you touched on areas where you've got, secrets in source code or sitting on file systems somewhere, and it just becomes this incredibly challenging area for customers to get their arms wrapped around when they're dealing with developers or machines or IT users, or even your workforce. They have access to very sensitive information. You want to be able to make sure you have just enough privilege for the entire ecosystem across your workforce and your IT world. How in your mind, Chris, is AI making this world harder?
It's such an interesting one because AI, like any technology or tool, right? It's a double-edged sword. And I think same thing for cybersecurity. On one hand, there's a need to secure AI, and then on the other hand, there's the opportunity to use AI for security. We know attackers are using it, right, to be more efficient, effective. We know our development peers are leaning into using it as a technology, and I think security has too as well. But it also, as you mentioned, like has some challenges there. As we talked about when it comes to agentic AI, the ability to kind of associate NHIs with these agents, have them go out and autonomously access sensitive data, and then LLMs and things like that. You could have these things, perhaps, depending how the training of LLMs, training data, things like that, potentially exposing sensitive information, including NHIs and credentials and things like that as well. So there's a whole multifaceted layer there, where there's actually a great framework out there for threat modeling called Maestro that folks can check out for agentic AI, and it goes all the way from the agents down to the LLMs and the models and the hosting infrastructure as well. And I think NHIs, they're very unique in the sense that they can touch almost every layer of that: the application, the agents, the LLMs, the underlying hosting environments as well, depending on the entitlement and permission associated with the entity and the NHI. So it's a complicated one, yeah.
It very much is. One of the ways that we think about it, and I'd be interested in your view, is we sort of two very sort of different perspectives on AI. One is we're trying to help customers secure and find secure and find AI within their ecosystem. So somebody's spun up an LLM or somebody's got an agent running on a CSP. We can help you find and help you get right-size that privilege. And that's sort of securing customers' AI. And then the second part of it is using AI to build better features to make customers more secure or more productive and all that kind of stuff. And we found that the first one is where most CISOs are really have the most awareness or worrisome, because they just don't know what's being out there. They don't have their head wrapped around it just yet. The second one, we're seeing a little bit more trepidation. We don't know. We want to see where our data is being used and what model is it being trained against, and a lot of more sort of governance of the software side of things. We're seeing that. I wonder is that consistent when you talk to folks?
Yeah, I think so for sure. There's, to your point, people want to have good visibility, good governance of the identities, the permissions, the models, the agents that are running in their environments. But there's a lot of interest and concern when it comes to the data, right? We hear data is the new oil, phrases like that. Like the attackers are after the data. Seasoned security leaders are very well aware of that. And they want to make sure that when it comes to LLMs and AI, that they have a good, data governance and data security approach as well, in terms of what can the model providers use my data for, what kind of data is being exposed to them. And to your earlier point, where are we running this in the environment? And we have this unique situation where many organizations, it's not just consuming external service providers from AI perspective, but often self-hosting and using open source models, hosting them in your own environment. So you have this kind of quasi, I guess hybrid cloud is like the greatest parallel I can think of, where you're consuming AI as a service, you're also running AI internally on your own infrastructure using a cloud service provider, things of that nature. So it leads to a lot of complexity and challenges like that.
Yeah, I was actually, maybe 6 or 8 months ago, was working with some of our researchers that are doing a lot of work on AI. And to date, I've been sort of using some of the online services and some of the prepackaged things. But then, like I said, about 6 or 8 months ago, I was playing around and they said, well, why don't you just set it up on one of your own systems and you can do it yourself. And I was astonished at how powerful of a system I could set up in literally a matter of a few hours of me tinkering around. And then I was like, in my role here at Delinea, obviously I was like, okay, if I can do that with a couple of hours of kind of tinkering, what can somebody who wants to really set up something, in a system, what can they really do? And so, it comes back to, and then I started thinking about, well, how can Delinea help find that? Because I didn't ask anybody's permission to do that. I just on one of my test networks just started adding things to it, and all of a sudden I had a functioning a functioning system that I could ask it questions and get it to do IT tasks, which was pretty scary.
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is a little bit beyond the NHI scope piece of it to some extent, but the biggest adoption, or one of the biggest adoption use cases for AI and agentic AI, seems to be coding agents and software development, right? And we see rapid adoption in that space. But what's interesting is we also see, again, to the zero trust moniker, like implicit trust of what the coding agents and coding tools are producing without much verification, validation of what's coming out the other end of it. And then not only that, but the coding agents themselves, I won't drop names of the leading ones, but I think just this week or last week I saw there was 95 vulnerabilities found in one of the leading coding agent platforms. So then those platforms themselves potentially become an attack surface. And then on the NHI piece, if you're enabling it to go out and use things like MCP, access external data stores, data sources, do things in the environment, that opens up a whole new can of worms too, that organizations need to start thinking about. So I'd be curious, like from Delinea's perspective, you're out here on the front lines interacting with customers and organizations that are kind of getting their hands around NHIs and the risks associated with NHIs, including agents and things like that. Like, where do you all even recommend folks get started? Because it can be daunting. It can be a complex endeavor.
It's extremely daunting, and we touched on this at the beginning. And we just had our strategic advisory board a couple of weeks ago in Chicago with a few CISOs that are on our sort of strategic customer list. And universal from them was, I need to know what my scope is. I need to understand where everything is from start to finish. It's what we talked about at the beginning. And we call it visibility, or we call it discovery. We talked about visibility earlier. And really giving them a view into that, so they know where the risks are. That's the sort of number one thing that I think that our customers see, and then they can take action. So I look at it as sort of two phases. There's more to it, but simplified. Let's find all the things we have. So let's see what they are, and let's protect them. And so we either protect them by right sizing them, we protect them by providing some sort of just in time, or we protect them by vaulting away a secret or other needs. And that's sort of our kind of approach there.
Yeah, you made me think of a follow-on question is, we're talking about NHIs and agents and things like as if it's, common knowledge to everyone. And I think a lot of folks are aware of it. But there's a lot of organizations when it comes to identity security, from the CISO, the security team's perspective, security org's perspective, they may be more in their infancy and haven't really, developed an NHI, kind of strategy as part of their broader identity security approach. What are some areas that folks should be thinking about or integrating into their identity security approach when it comes to NHIs if they haven't even kind of started down that path yet?
I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but you really should get your visibility clear, because if you're focusing entirely on humans and what your human users are doing, virtually every single company is using service accounts. They're using machine communication. They may or may not have LLMs being spun up or agents being spun up on their cloud, but that stuff exists in their environment. And so gaining visibility, not just of the accounts that are out there and the identities that are out there, but what permissions are associated with those accounts. And then you can have an attack plan. But if you have your sort of blinders on and you're focused just on what can Phil, the IT admin, actually do, then you've got an entire blast radius that you are ignoring. And so that I'm pretty much consistent with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. There's no harm in repeating it. And honestly, like again, I love my catchphrases in cyber because we have so many of them. Is like, you can't protect what you don't know exists. It's like one you hear often. And that's been around long before NHIs. Like, and it's because it's
100%.
true. It was true 10 years ago and it's true now. And I was going to ask you too, as you start, you're out there working with teams who are trying to tackle this problem, security, again, with my catchphrases, you guys are going to hate this by the end, but like, security is often seen as the office of no, right? Or being a blocker, right? Not a business enabler. As you see like teams trying to adopt platforms like Delinea and use some of these tools and enable developers to move fast, like that's part of the challenge with NHIs is people have been able to create identities in source code management, containers, and different cloud environments, things like that. How do you introduce these tools like Delinea and others to enable teams but not slow them down and be seen as an impediment and make them dread engaging with security, as like often happens as well?
So one of the things about so I've been building software for most of my life, and one of the things that's really core to my tenet of how I build software is usability. And usability takes up lots of forms depending on what you're using. And so we work extremely hard with what we're doing to make it feel very natural to the user what they're doing without becoming onerous. So, for example, if you're used to working in a tool, you should be able to continue along in that tool, and then the security should just be a side effect. It kind of just lives in the ecosystem. And if you do a good job of that, then you can be both secure and usable at the same time. I don't think that they need to be mutually exclusive. Now that's a goal of ours. I'm a little OCD on the experience, so it takes it. We're not quite 100% there yet, but we'll continue to push the envelope. So
yeah, I'll just say as an aside, like, given the role you're in, it's I think it's a great point and a great perspective to have, because that user experience is going to define whether people adopt it or reject it, and that's going to dictate the success of your initiatives, to be honest.
Exactly. People will figure their way around it if they don't. So Chris, really appreciate your time. What do you think? Do you think of one or two things you want folks to take away from this?
Yeah, I would say, first off, again, like I started the conversation with, it may seem overwhelming at first, but these concepts, least permissive access control, overly permissive, entitlements, secret storage and avoiding secret leakage. These concepts are things that we're very familiar with in security. It's just kind of moving that paradigm to these concepts of NHIs and agents and things like that. So, don't feel overwhelmed, just kind of, you'll be familiar with these concepts as you start to dig in. And then again, to what I talked about, lean into groups, OWASP, things like that. They have the NHI top 10, they have the agentic AI top 10, different resources to help you look at, like, what are some of the most prevalent risks, associated with these challenges around NHIs and agents and AI and so on. And then, take a look at your tech stack, your security tooling, and ask, do I have what I need, right, to get the visibility, to get the governance, to get the kind of enforcement and things that I'm after? And if not, you need to kind of reconcile that by looking for some tools to help close gaps, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the call out to OWASP. They have some tremendous resources. I would echo your focus on visibility, focus on what you can see, your entire ecosystem, and then you can develop an action plan. And try not to get caught up in this industry throwing acronyms for every new acronym that they throw out. It's really, you've got your basic identities, and you've got an identity, and it's got some permissions, and whether it's a machine or whether it's an agent or a human, that's what you can focus on. So, all right, Chris, really appreciate your time today. This was a ton of fun. I look forward to chatting again in the future, and have an awesome day.